So let's work from that. If you will, think of sociology from a different perspective, and that is the way in which sociology might make familiar things strange to you. Now, I don't mean strange as if you were hallucinating. Instead, I mean strange in which you've become accustomed to doing things in a certain way, without necessarily having understood a larger context in which those things happen. This raises a larger issue, and that is a concept of what is the nature or the context of our experiences. From a sociological perspective, this involves the concept, sociological imagination, a concept recognized by C. Wright Mills, a researcher who, if you're planning on taking more sociology classes, you'll be hearing more of. But he came up with the definition of sociological imagination by suggesting that it involves the ability to see connections of personal experiences and the larger forces of history. If you will, there are ways in which we see certain things, we do certain things. That process recognizes or creates connections. And those connections, therefore, make the kinds of experiences that, when layered upon one another, make up a person's life. From the perspective of sociology, then, the idea of a sociological imagination is what is it from our experiences that we've ended up considering or looking at to the degree that they become things that are natural in life. Let's go back to the first question that I raised to you. Why are you taking this course? But let's blow it up a bit, if you will. Why are you going to college? Now, from the perspective of a sociologist, the answer to the why question might mean exploring the options available to you. For example, there are simple options. Go to college, not go to college. So if you're trying to figure this out, then you'd need to figure out what is the cost and the benefit of selecting each particular option. Think of it this way. Imagine that you end up attending school where the costs total up to $17,000 a year. Obviously, your mileage may vary. If you're not going to Bridgewater State, another school that may have those as the operating costs. Consider then that that's a year's tuition. Then factor in the fact that every year tuition will go up, which is not automatic, and sometimes tuition doesn't go up quite as much as, say, the rate of inflation. But let's assume that the costs for attending school increases roughly 4% every year. Now I'm emphasizing tuition. Of course, it'll vary in states. In Massachusetts, you'll find that there are fees as well as tuition. Part of the peculiarity of the reason why you have these two different methods of billing a student for the educational experience here has to do with what happens with the money. And my understanding is that in this state, tuition is something that the state subsidizes because it values the benefit of having an educated populace. But the fees tend to generate monies that are kept on the campuses. So what you might end up seeing is that fees will vary from campus to campus depending upon all the plans that have been made about what to do with those particular monies. In any case, if we end up assuming $17,000 a year at 4% interest, over the span of 4 years, that's roughly $70,000. So we're getting closer to the point of being able to compare the options of going to college versus not going to college. But there are additional costs that may not seem obvious. If you will, hidden costs. One of the hidden costs associated with going to college is the fact that when you're going to school, you may not be working. Yes, I know. If you're going to a school like Bridgewater State, you're probably working 3 part-time jobs that would exceed the number of hours that you would work if you're doing a full-time job. Perhaps that means that once you graduate, it means that you'll work less. Be that as it may, even with your 3 part-time jobs, it may be better that you end up getting a full-time job. So think of it this way. you're not only paying for the schooling, but you're missing out on the opportunity to work and enjoy the income and benefits that come from full-time work. Our author ends up doing some back-of-the-envelope calculations and comes up with a rough figure that attending a 4-year school, perhaps like Bridgewater State, runs a person about $190,000 a year for the full 4 years. So the question is it worth it? Well, contrast that with the other major option I've suggested that you look at, going to work and then deciding perhaps at some point to go back to school. Why would you do that? In our society, increasingly, historically, we're starting to see that having credentials makes it possible for certain things to happen. That jobs may end up asking that people have some educational experience. This gets into a little dicey area that technically you could end up having someone asking for a college grad that might end up violating laws against discrimination, because the implication is that not everyone is going to have the economic basis for being able to go to college. So there may be some wrinkles to it. But nonetheless, even if it's not overt, it turns out that having a college degree could end up making it possible to do certain kinds of jobs, and then within a particular field, perhaps even to advance. So, for example, as you might expect, I have an undergraduate degree, but to be able to teach at the university level, that's not sufficient. So I ended up going and taking more education to be able to get a graduate degree, which qualifies me to teach here. Since then, I've also picked up another graduate degree. So it means that by having a credential, you'll have an increased possibility for being able to do certain kinds of jobs. But is it necessary? The whole point to credentials is that, at least in our society, it seems that a credential becomes the validation of your experience.